The German Shepherd sat motionless outside room 218 at Veterans Memorial Hospital, his amber eyes fixed on the door as if waiting for someone who would never return. For 63 days, he had appeared at dawn, positioning himself in the exact same spot, refusing food from strangers, enduring attempts to remove him. By day, he followed the medication cart with military precision at 3 p.m. By night, he somehow slipped inside despite locked doors. "That dog's back again," muttered Dr. Anderson, the chief of medicine. "Call security." Head nurse Sarah Thompson watched the animal's unwavering vigilance through the security monitor, a chill creeping down her spine. Something wasn't right. Last week, the dog had stood up and stared at room 218's window precisely at 2:17 a.m., the exact moment a patient inside had flatlined. Yesterday, she'd found a worn military dog tag around his neck bearing the name SSG James Miller and 5 words that wouldn't leave her mind: "I'll be home soon, buddy." Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. Veterans Memorial Hospital stood on a gentle hill overlooking Spring Creek, Wisconsin, its red brick facade and white columns projecting an air of dignity befitting its purpose. The hospital had served the town's veteran community for over 50 years, its halls bearing witness to countless stories of courage, sacrifice, and homecoming. Spring Creek itself was a quintessential Midwestern town where American flags flew year-round from porches, and the annual Veterans Day Parade drew crowds from neighboring counties. With 3 military bases within a 100-mile radius, service to country wasn't just respected here, it was a way of life. The hospital's East Wing, where room 218 was located, specialized in long-term care and rehabilitation for wounded warriors. Its wide corridors were designed to accommodate wheelchairs and stretchers. Walls adorned with black and white photographs documenting the town's military heritage stretching back to World War II. Max, the 7-year-old German Shepherd, had once been among the military's elite, a specially trained service dog who had completed 3 tours in Afghanistan alongside his handler, Staff Sergeant James "Jimmy" Miller. Their bond had been forged in the crucible of combat, where Max's keen senses had saved their unit multiple times from hidden explosives and ambushes. The dog's muscular frame now appeared leaner, his once glossy coat dulled, but his discipline remained unchanged, a soldier still on duty. Sarah Thompson had worked at Veterans Memorial for 12 years, rising to head nurse through a combination of clinical excellence and genuine compassion. At 35, her auburn hair was typically pulled back in a practical ponytail, her scrubs always neat despite the long shifts. A military daughter herself, Sarah understood the unique needs of veteran patients in ways her colleagues sometimes missed. Emily Miller, only 9 years old, with her father's determined blue eyes and sandy blonde hair, now lived with her grandmother Margaret Wallace on the outskirts of town. Since losing her father 3 months ago, Emily had withdrawn into a world of silence, her grief too heavy for her young shoulders. The walls of her bedroom were covered with photos of her dad and Max, mementos of happier times. Dr. Robert Anderson ran the hospital with military precision, unsurprising given his 20 years as a Navy physician before returning to civilian practice. His priority was patient care, and hospital regulations existed for good reasons, including those prohibiting animals from the premises except for registered service dogs accompanying current patients. Director Patricia Winters oversaw hospital operations with an eye toward public relations and liability concerns. At 58, her carefully maintained appearance and politician's smile masked a woman who'd fought hard to earn respect in healthcare administration. The situation with Max represented exactly the kind of irregular situation she'd built her career on preventing. The first time Max appeared at Veterans Memorial Hospital was exactly 3 months after Staff Sergeant James Miller was laid to rest, with full military honors. The morning shift had just begun when security guard Frank Peterson noticed the German Shepherd sitting attentively by the east entrance, as if waiting for someone to open the door. Thinking the animal was lost, Frank approached slowly, hand extended in friendship. The dog didn't growl or retreat. He simply stared at the door with such focused intensity that Frank felt a shiver despite the warm spring morning. "Hey there, big fella. You lost?" Frank asked, noting the lack of a collar. The dog's ears perked up momentarily before returning to their alert position. When Frank tried to guide him away from the entrance, the shepherd sidestepped with surprising agility, returning to his post. By midday, concerns about having a stray dog on hospital grounds prompted Frank to call animal control. The officer who responded managed to secure Max with a loop, leading him to the van despite the dog's dignified resistance. "He's healthy but thin," the officer noted. "No microchip that I can detect. We'll keep him for the standard hold period in case an owner comes forward." The following morning at precisely 9:00 a.m., the start of hospital visiting hours, Frank was astonished to see the same German Shepherd sitting at the east entrance again. His posture perfect, his gaze unwavering. This time, when the doors opened automatically for an arriving visitor, the dog slipped inside before Frank could react. Security footage would later show how Max navigated the hospital corridors with eerie familiarity, making his way directly to the 3rd floor, East Wing, where he sat down outside room 218, the room where Staff Sergeant Miller had spent his final weeks. When an orderly attempted to remove him, Max didn't resist, but simply returned to the same spot after being escorted outside. "That dog knows something we don't," remarked Doris Williams, a veteran nurse who'd helped care for Sergeant Miller. "I've seen that look before in the eyes of family members who can sense when something's not right." By the end of the first week, Max's daily appearances had become something of a hospital curiosity. Some staff members began leaving water bowls for him, while others complained about potential hygiene violations. Max never made a sound, never approached patients, never created any disturbance. He simply maintained his vigil outside room 218, which now housed a retired Marine recovering from hip surgery. Sarah Thompson first noticed Max during her Tuesday morning rounds. Having grown up with German Shepherds, she recognized the military bearing in his posture, the disciplined patience that separated trained service dogs from pets. What caught her attention wasn't just his presence, but his pattern each day at exactly 3:00 p.m., when the medication cart made its rounds. Max would rise from his position and follow at a precise distance, accompanying the nurse down the hallway, past 6 rooms, before returning to his post outside 218. "It's like he's checking on the other patients," whispered Nancy Blackwood, a volunteer who'd taken to sneaking treats to Max despite hospital regulations. By the 3rd week, Dr. Anderson had run out of patience. "This can't continue," he announced during the staff meeting. "However well behaved, we cannot have an unregistered animal roaming the halls of a medical facility. It violates health codes and presents liability issues." "He's not roaming," Sarah countered. "He sits in one spot and follows the med cart once a day. Several patients have mentioned that his presence actually brightens their day. Rules exist for a reason. Nurse Thompson, Director Winters interjected, her voice carrying the weight of final authority. We've already made 3 attempts to remove the animal humanely. I've scheduled animal control to collect him tomorrow morning. They'll check for a microchip and attempt to find his owner. What Sarah couldn't explain to them, what she barely admitted to herself, was how Max had somehow entered the hospital overnight despite locked doors. Security footage revealed only a brief shadow near the emergency exit at 2 a.m., then inexplicably showed Max already inside, sleeping under the vacant bed in room 218 until dawn, when he would return to his daytime post in the hallway. After the meeting, Sarah approached Roger Kim, the night security guard. "Have you been letting the dog in?" she asked without accusation. Roger shook his head. "I've been trying to figure that out myself. The emergency exit alarm never sounds, but somehow he gets in. It's the strangest thing I've seen in 15 years on this job." That evening, Sarah stayed late, reviewing security footage from the past weeks. She noticed how patients would sometimes reach out to Max as they passed on gurneys or in wheelchairs. The dog would momentarily meet their gaze, a connection passing between them that the camera captured but couldn't explain. Most peculiar was what happened 2 nights ago. At precisely 2:17 a.m., Max, who had been sleeping under the bed in room 218, suddenly stood at attention, staring at the window. 3 minutes later, monitors for Mr. Harrison in room 220 began alarming as the patient went into cardiac arrest. The medical team had managed to revive him, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Max had somehow sensed the crisis before the machines did. As her shift ended, Sarah made a decision that went against hospital policy. Instead of leaving Max to be collected by animal control in the morning, she approached him quietly in the hallway. "I don't know your story yet," she whispered, kneeling beside him, "but I'm going to try to help you." Max turned his amber eyes toward her, the first time he'd fully acknowledged anyone since arriving, and Sarah felt a connection that transcended words. His gaze held such intelligence and sorrow that Sarah found herself blinking back unexpected tears. From her pocket, she produced a simple collar and ID tag she'd purchased on her lunch break. "This might buy us some time to figure things out," she said, gently securing it around his neck. The tag read simply, "Max, Therapy Dog in Training, Veterans Memorial Hospital." What Sarah couldn't have known was that Director Winters was watching this interaction on the security monitor. Her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval, her hand already reaching for the phone to ensure animal control arrived first thing in the morning. Sarah arrived at the hospital an hour before her shift the next morning, her heart pounding as she hurried through the staff entrance. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with questions about Max and his mysterious connection to room 218. The security desk was empty. Frank must have been making his rounds, giving her the opportunity she needed. Slipping into the security office, Sarah logged into the system using the emergency access code. Her hands trembled slightly as she navigated to the archived footage. She had just 40 minutes before the animal control van would arrive, and she needed answers. The footage from 3 months ago showed a different story than she expected. On the night James Miller died, the camera captured a German shepherd, unmistakably Max, lying beside his bed, head resting on paws. When the monitors began to alarm and medical staff rushed in, Max didn't panic or interfere. Instead, he stood at attention beside the bed, a soldier honoring his fallen comrade. After James was pronounced dead at 2:17 a.m., the dog followed the gurney partway down the hall before stopping, as if he understood he could go no further. He was here when James died, Sarah whispered to herself. But where has he been for the past 3 months? The footage from 1 week ago revealed something even more extraordinary. Max entered the hospital through the emergency exit at exactly 2:00 a.m., though the door never appeared to open. He made his way directly to room 218, now occupied by Mr. Grayson, a Vietnam veteran recovering from pneumonia. Instead of disturbing the patient, Max simply circled the bed once, then settled underneath it, as if standing guard. Sarah was so engrossed in the footage that she jumped when her phone vibrated with a text from Nancy. "Animal control in the parking lot. Where are you?" Quickly logging out, Sarah rushed to the east wing, her mind racing. As she rounded the corner, she saw Max still sitting outside room 218, maintaining his quiet vigil. At the far end of the corridor, Dr. Anderson was speaking with a uniformed animal control officer. "Max," she called softly, kneeling beside him. "We need to—" Her words were cut short by the arrival of an elderly woman and a young girl through the elevator doors. The woman moved with the careful steps of someone managing arthritic pain, while the girl, no more than 9 or 10, walked with her head down, blonde hair partially hiding her face. "We're here to see Dr. Morris," the woman was telling the receptionist. "Margaret Wallace and Emily Miller. It's about Emily's asthma follow-up." At the sound of the girl's voice, Max's head snapped up. His entire body tensed, ears forward, eyes locked on the child. Before Sarah could react, Max was on his feet, moving swiftly but calmly down the corridor toward the girl. "Ma'am, please step back," called the animal control officer, moving quickly toward them. "We're about to secure this stray." But Max wasn't acting aggressively. He stopped 2 feet from the girl, his tail making a single slow wag. The child looked up, her expression transforming from indifference to shock. "Max," her voice was barely audible. "Max." In an instant, the girl was on her knees, arms wrapped around the German shepherd's neck, her small body shaking with sobs. Max pressed against her, his disciplined demeanor giving way to gentle whines as he nuzzled her hair. "Emily, get away from that dog right now," her grandmother demanded, reaching for her shoulder. "No, it's Max. It's Daddy's Max." The girl's voice broke through her tears. "He came back. I told you he would come back." The entire hallway had gone silent. Patients and staff stood frozen, watching the reunion unfold. Dr. Anderson approached cautiously, the animal control officer close behind. "You know this dog?" he asked, his tone softening at the sight of the child's tears. Emily nodded vigorously, her arms still wrapped around Max's neck. "He's my dad's service dog from Afghanistan. He disappeared after the funeral. We thought—" Her voice caught. "We thought he was gone too." Sarah felt a chill run through her as the pieces began to connect. "Your dad," she said gently, kneeling beside Emily. "Was he James Miller? Staff Sergeant Miller?" The girl's blue eyes, red-rimmed from crying, met Sarah's. "Yes. He was in room 218. He died here." Margaret Wallace's stern expression had given way to bewilderment. "The dog ran off after the burial. We searched everywhere. How could he possibly—" "He's been coming here every day for the past 2 months," Sarah explained, looking from the grandmother to the animal control officer. "Sitting outside his former room following the same patterns. Dr. Anderson cleared his throat. While this is certainly an unexpected, it doesn't change hospital policy regarding animals on the premises. Please, Emily's voice was small but determined, please don't take him away again. He's all I have left of my dad. The animal control officer shifted uncomfortably. I'm just doing my job, sir. If the dog has an owner, the dog belongs to a deceased veteran. Director Winters interrupted, having arrived unnoticed during the commotion. The legal situation regarding ownership would need to be clarified before any action is taken. Sarah saw her opening. Director Winters, I've been reviewing the security footage. There's something unusual about Max's behavior that I think warrants further investigation before any decisions are made. Winter's eyebrow arched skeptically. What kind of investigation? Nurse Thompson. Give me 48 hours, Sarah requested. 2 days to document his behavior and understand why he's been coming here. Emily could help us understand his training and background. Emily looked up hopefully, her hand buried in Max's fur as if afraid he might disappear again. Max saved my dad's unit 3 times in Afghanistan. He can sense things before they happen. That's what Daddy always said. Director Winters glanced at her watch, then at the gathering crowd of patients and visitors watching the scene unfold. Making a scene with a child present would hardly help the hospital's image. 48 hours, she conceded curtly. The dog remains on hospital grounds under your direct supervision. Nurse Thompson, if he presents any risk or disruption, he'll be removed immediately. She turned to the animal control officer. We'll contact your department if needed. As the crowd dispersed and Emily reluctantly prepared to leave for her doctor's appointment, she whispered something in Max's ear. The dog sat at attention, watching her walk away, but remained at his post outside room 218. What did you tell him? Sarah asked gently. Emily's eyes were dry now. A spark of life returned to them. I told him I'd be back, and that he was a good boy for finding where Daddy went. She hesitated. My dad promised Max he'd come home. Before he left for his last deployment, he always told Max, I'll be home soon, buddy. I think Max is still waiting for him to keep his promise. Sarah felt her throat tighten as she watched the girl follow her grandmother to the pediatric wing. She had 48 hours to unravel the mystery of Max's behavior, and perhaps, in doing so, help a little girl find some peace. Sarah's afternoon shift passed in a blur of medication rounds and patient check-ins, her mind constantly returning to Max and Emily. The German shepherd had remained at his post outside room 218, occasionally acknowledging passing staff with a flick of his ears, but otherwise maintaining his solemn vigil. During her breaks, Sarah documented his behavior, noting how his routine aligned perfectly with the hospital schedule, as if he had memorized it. At precisely 3:00 p.m., Max rose from his spot and followed Sarah as she pushed the medication cart, maintaining a perfect heel position 3 feet behind her. The behavior was so precise it could only come from rigorous training. He's doing exactly what he did with James, observed Doris, who had cared for Sergeant Miller during his final weeks. James would make his rounds every afternoon, visiting the other veterans. Max always followed just like that, never getting in the way, always alert. James visited other patients, Sarah asked, surprised. Most long-term patients rarely left their rooms. Doris nodded, her eyes softening with the memory. Every day at the same time. Said it was his duty to check on his fellow soldiers. Started the day he could get out of bed himself. Some days he could barely walk, but he'd still make his rounds. As Sarah completed her medication distribution, Max followed her to precisely 6 rooms, the same 6 James had apparently visited daily before returning to his position outside room 218. The pattern was unmistakable. Max wasn't just haunting his former owner's room. He was completing James's routine. After her shift ended, Sarah waited in the hospital lobby for Emily and her grandmother to return. Margaret had reluctantly agreed to bring Emily back after her appointment, giving the girl 30 minutes to visit with Max while Sarah observed. When Emily arrived, her transformation was remarkable. The withdrawn child from earlier had been replaced by an animated girl clutching a worn photo album. Max's reaction was equally dramatic. His tail wagged gently, his posture relaxing as Emily approached. "Can we sit with him somewhere quiet?" Emily asked. "I brought pictures to show you." Sarah led them to a small courtyard designed for patient rehabilitation. As they settled on a bench, Max positioned himself at Emily's feet, his head resting lightly against her leg. "Dad got Max when I was 4, Emily began, opening the album to show a younger James Miller in desert camouflage, kneeling beside a slightly younger Max. They trained together for 6 months before deploying. Dad said Max was the smartest dog in the program." The album told the story of a remarkable partnership. Page after page showed James and Max in Afghanistan, resting in barracks, patrolling dusty roads, posing with fellow soldiers. In every photo, Max's attention was fixed on James, a vigilance that transcended mere training. This was after Max found the hidden explosives, Emily explained, pointing to a photo where James was receiving a commendation. "Dad said Max saved 16 people that day. And this one," she turned the page to show James with his arm in a sling, Max pressed against his side, "was after they got hurt together. The doctor wanted to send Max home, but Dad wouldn't let them." Margaret, who had been standing slightly apart, watching with a guarded expression, finally spoke. "James always said that dog understood everything. Not just commands everything. After James's wife Emily's mother died from cancer 5 years ago, the dog wouldn't leave his side for weeks." Sarah studied a family photo showing James, Emily, and Max on the porch of a modest home. "What happened when James was admitted to the hospital?" Emily's face clouded. "They wouldn't let Max come inside at first. Dad was so upset. He said Max would know something was wrong if he couldn't see him." She turned another page, revealing a photo taken in room 218, James in a hospital bed, Max lying on a blanket beside him. Dr. Anderson finally made an exception because he wasn't going to get better. "Your father had terminal cancer," Margaret supplied gently, "the same type that took his wife Emily's mother. He'd been fighting it for 2 years, but the last 3 months—" She trailed off, her hand moving unconsciously to squeeze Emily's shoulder. Emily nodded, her chin trembling slightly. "Dad told Max he had to be strong, that he had to take care of me now." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "The night before he died, I heard him telling Max, 'I'll be home soon, buddy. You watch over my little girl until then.'" Sarah felt her throat tighten. "And Max disappeared after the funeral." "He followed the hearse to the cemetery," Emily confirmed. "He stayed by the grave during the whole service. When they played taps and fired the rifles, He stood at attention like the soldiers did, but when we went home afterward, he was gone. We looked everywhere. For the next hour, Emily shared stories about her father and Max while Sarah took notes. The German Shepherd's training had been extensive. He could detect changes in body chemistry that signaled an impending seizure or blood sugar crash. He had been taught to respond to over 50 verbal commands and 24 hand signals. He could locate specific people by scent over vast distances. "Before you go," Sarah said as their time was ending, "would you show me what commands Max responds to? It might help us understand his behavior here." Emily nodded eagerly. She stood and issued a series of commands: sit, stay, heel, down, which Max followed instantly. Then she gave a hand signal Sarah didn't recognize, and Max moved to the door, positioned himself beside it, and scanned the area systematically. "What's that command?" Sarah asked. "It means check for danger," Emily explained. "Dad taught him to clear rooms in Afghanistan." As Emily and Margaret prepared to leave, the girl knelt beside Max. "I'll come back tomorrow," she promised, wrapping her arms around his neck. Max licked her cheek, once the most emotion Sarah had seen from him. After they left, Sarah continued her documentation. That evening, she obtained permission from Dr. Anderson to stay overnight and observe Max's nocturnal behavior. Armed with a tablet for notes and a thermos of coffee, she settled into a chair at the nurse's station with a clear view of room 218 at precisely 10:00 p.m. after the final medication round. Max rose from his position and walked slowly down the corridor. Sarah followed at a distance as he made his way to each of the 6 rooms James had visited during his stays. At each door, Max paused, his ears moving forward as if listening, before moving to the next. "He's checking on them," Sarah murmured to herself. "Just like James did." Around midnight, an orderly approached with a sandwich. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, introducing himself as Mike. "I worked nights when Sergeant Miller was here. That dog." He nodded toward Max, who had returned to room 218. "He used to help the sergeant make his rounds when he got too weak to walk alone. Miller would lean on him like a cane." "Did you ever see Max react to anything unusual?" Sarah asked. "Any patient emergencies or alarms?" Mike's expression turned thoughtful. "There was one night Mr. Geller in 224 went into respiratory distress. No alarms had gone off yet, but Max started whining and pulled the sergeant to that room. Miller pushed the call button, and we got there just as Geller started turning blue. Doctor said another couple minutes, and he might not have made it. By 2:00 a.m., the corridor was quiet except for the occasional squeak of rubber-soled shoes and the soft beeping of monitors. Sarah's eyes were growing heavy when she noticed Max stand up, alert. He walked to the emergency exit at the end of the hall, sat down beside it, and waited. 3 minutes later, the door opened as Roger Kim, the night security guard, entered for his hourly rounds. Roger froze at the sight of Max, then noticed Sarah. "He does this every night," he admitted. "Waits for me at exactly the same time. It's like he's got a clock in his head." "Did James Miller know your round schedule?" Sarah asked. Roger nodded. "The sergeant would sometimes walk with me when he couldn't sleep. Said the routine reminded him of perimeter checks in Afghanistan." After Roger continued his rounds, Sarah watched as Max returned to room 218. To her surprise, the current patient, an elderly veteran named Howard Grayson, opened the door and beckoned Max inside. "Mr. Grayson?" Sarah began, approaching with concern. "Hospital policy doesn't allow—" "Don't worry, Nurse Thompson," the older man interrupted with a gentle smile. "Max and I have an understanding. He's been sleeping under my bed for the past week. Best sleep I've had since Nam. Something about having him on watch." He shrugged. "A soldier knows when he's safe." Sarah documented this unexpected development, watching as Max circled the room once checking it. She now realized, before settling under the bed, his eyes remaining alert and fixed on the door. The next morning, Sarah compiled her observations into a report, highlighting Max's pattern of behavior and its connection to James Miller's routines. She was preparing to email it to Dr. Anderson when Nancy from reception called. "You need to come down here," Nancy said urgently. "The director is having a fit about the dog, and there's a whole group of veterans in the lobby demanding to see her." Sarah hurried downstairs to find the hospital lobby filled with at least 24 men and women, many wearing veteran-themed caps or jackets. At their center stood a tall man with silver hair and captain's bars pinned to his collar, Captain Michael Reynolds, whom Sarah recognized as the head of the local VFW post. Director Winters was attempting to manage the situation, her professional smile strained. "Gentlemen, ladies, I understand your concerns, but hospital policy is clear about, we're not leaving until you hear us out," Captain Reynolds stated firmly. "James Miller was one of our own. That dog served this country with as much courage as any soldier. He's earned the right to be here." Sarah approached, catching the director's eye. "Ms. Winters, I have my observation report. There's something you need to see." Before Winters could respond, the hospital doors opened, and Emily entered with Margaret. The crowd of veterans parted respectfully, creating a path for them to approach. Emily's eyes widened at the gathering. "Are they here for Max?" she asked Sarah. Captain Reynolds knelt to Emily's level, his weathered face softening. "Your dad was our brother-in-arms, little one. That makes you and Max family. We take care of our own." Director Winters, recognizing the public relations implications of the situation, gestured toward her office. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion privately. Captain Reynolds, Mrs. Wallace, Emily and Nurse Thompson, bring your report." Once settled in the director's office, Sarah presented her findings, explaining Max's precise replication of James's hospital routine and his apparent ability to detect medical distress before monitoring equipment. "Furthermore," she continued, "Mr. Grayson reports his anxiety and nightmares have decreased significantly since Max began staying in his room. He's needed less pain medication and his blood pressure has stabilized." Captain Reynolds leaned forward. "Service dogs like Max are trained to detect subtle changes in body chemistry. They can sense a seizure coming minutes before it happens, identify dangerous blood sugar levels, even detect certain cancers. In combat zones, they save lives daily." "I understand the dog's capabilities," Director Winters replied, "but we have protocols and liability concerns. What happens if he interferes with medical equipment or frightens a patient? He hasn't done either in 2 months." Sarah pointed out. Margaret, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "When James was diagnosed with terminal cancer, he made arrangements for everything: his funeral, Emily's guardianship, his will. But he was most concerned about Max." She reached into her purse and removed a sealed envelope. "This was with his personal effects, I never opened it because after Max disappeared, it didn't seem to matter." The envelope, addressed to Veterans Memorial Hospital Administration, contained a handwritten letter and several official-looking documents. Sarah watched Director Winter's expression change as she read the letter. Sergeant Miller was requesting that Max be considered for the hospital's therapy dog program, a program we discontinued 5 years ago due to budget cuts. "Dad said Max would need a mission after he was gone," Emily said quietly. "He said soldiers can't retire without a new purpose." Captain Reynolds nodded in understanding. "The dog is still trying to fulfill his handler's final orders to complete his rounds and watch over the other veterans. He's doing exactly what James trained him to do." Director Winters set the letter down, her professional demeanor softening slightly. "These are compelling arguments, but they don't address the practical concerns of having an animal on the premises full-time. Who would be responsible for him? Where would he stay? How would we manage feeding, veterinary care, liability insurance? The VFW would cover all expenses," Captain Reynolds offered immediately. "We've already discussed it." "And I can help with his daily care," Sarah added. "He's already integrated into our routine." Director Winters turned to Margaret. "And you, Mrs. Wallace, as Emily's guardian, what is your position?" Margaret's hands twisted in her lap. "I couldn't give Emily back her father," she said slowly. "And I blamed Max, irrationally, for surviving when James didn't, for disappearing when Emily needed him." She looked at her granddaughter. "But seeing them together again, James would want them to have each other." Emily reached over and took her grandmother's hand. "Max could stay with us on my days off from school," she suggested. "And be here the rest of the time, helping people like Daddy wanted?" Director Winters was silent for a long moment, tapping her pen against the desk. Finally, she sighed. "I'll need to consult with our legal team and the board. In the meantime, the current arrangement can continue under Nurse Thompson's supervision." As they left the office, Sarah's phone chimed with a text from Doris. "Come quick. Max is acting strange." Sarah hurried to the East Wing with Emily and Margaret following close behind. They found Max standing rigidly outside room 222, where an elderly patient named Walter Collins had been admitted the previous day for observation after a fall. "He's been like this for 10 minutes, Doris explained. "Won't move, won't respond to anyone." Sarah checked Mr. Collins' chart on the wall tablet. Vital signs normal. "Last checked 30 minutes ago." "Has the doctor seen him yet this morning?" "Dr. Peterson did rounds an hour ago, said everything looked good." Emily approached Max cautiously. "He's alerting," she said, recognizing the posture. "Something's wrong with the patient." Sarah hesitated only briefly before opening the door. Mr. Collins appeared to be sleeping peacefully, but Max immediately entered the room and stood beside the bed, whining softly. Years of nursing experience kicked in as Sarah approached the patient. "Mr. Collins," she called, noting the unusual pallor of his skin. When he didn't respond, she checked his pulse, weak and irregular. His breathing was shallow. "Call a code," Sarah ordered Doris, already reaching for the emergency button, his pressures crashing. Within minutes, the room filled with the code team. As they worked to stabilize Mr. Collins, Dr. Anderson arrived, taking in the scene with a practiced eye. "What alerted you?" he asked Sarah as the team prepared to transfer Collins to intensive care. Max, she answered simply, nodding toward the German shepherd who had retreated to the corner, watching intently. He knew before any of the monitors alarmed. Dr. Anderson's expression was unreadable as he followed the gurney out. Only after the corridor had cleared did he approach Sarah again. The dog alerted to a cardiac event that our telemetry didn't catch, he said quietly. Collins was experiencing a silent heart attack with minimal electrical changes. If you hadn't checked on him when you did. He left the sentence unfinished, his gaze shifting to Max, who had returned to his post outside room 218. Will you support our proposal to Director Winters? Sarah asked. Dr. Anderson adjusted his glasses thoughtfully. I'm a man of science. Nurse Thompson, I believe in evidence. What I just witnessed is evidence I cannot ignore. He nodded once, decisively. I'll speak with Patricia this afternoon. As word spread through the hospital about Max's role in detecting Mr. Collins' heart attack, sentiment among the staff shifted dramatically. Nurses began including Max in their rounds, introducing him to patients, explaining his special connection to the hospital. Veterans in particular responded to his presence, many sharing stories of service dogs they had worked with overseas. That afternoon, Emily returned with a special vest she had kept after her father's death, a military-grade service dog harness with working dog patches, and a special pocket containing James's service photo. Dad would want him to wear it, she said as she carefully fitted it over Max's head. It means he's on duty. With the vest on, Max's demeanor subtly changed, his posture became even more attentive, his movements more deliberate. The transformation was remarkable. He was no longer just a loyal dog, but a soldier resuming his post. As Sarah watched Emily with Max, she realized that the healing was happening in both directions. The withdrawn child she had first met was emerging from her shell, animated by the purpose of advocating for her father's beloved partner. And Max, who had spent months maintaining a solitary vigil, was reconnecting with the human connection he had lost. But as the day progressed, Sarah couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. Director Winters had been conspicuously absent since their morning meeting, and Sarah had overheard snippets of a tense phone conversation between Winters and someone from the hospital board. The 48-hour evaluation period would end tomorrow morning, and despite the day's dramatic events, Sarah wasn't confident in a positive outcome. Her concerns deepened that evening when she received an email from hospital administration. A mandatory staff meeting had been scheduled for 9:00 a.m. the following day to address the situation regarding the unauthorized animal on premises. The formal language and timing suggested that Director Winters had already made her decision, and it wasn't the one Sarah had hoped for. The morning of the final decision dawned with an unusual bustle of activity at Veterans Memorial Hospital. Sarah arrived early, having slept little, to find a small crowd already gathering in the parking lot. Veterans from yesterday's group had returned, joined by community members and several local news vans. Word about Max had spread through Spring Creek with remarkable speed. "They're calling him the guardian dog," Nancy informed Sarah as she hurried through the staff entrance. "Someone posted a photo on social media yesterday, and it went viral overnight. The switchboard's been ringing non-stop." Sarah made her way to the East Wing, where Max maintained his usual post outside room 218. She knelt beside him, stroking his head gently. "We've got a big day ahead, buddy," she murmured. "A lot of people are fighting for you." At her touch, Max leaned slightly against her leg, a small gesture that felt like gratitude. Over the past 48 hours, Sarah had noticed subtle changes in his behavior. He remained vigilant, but the profound sadness in his eyes had lightened. Having Emily back in his life seemed to have awakened something in him, a connection to purpose beyond his solitary vigil. Dr. Anderson approached, his expression grave. "The board members have arrived early for a pre-meeting with Director Winters," he informed her. "I've shared the medical data from yesterday's incident with Mr. Collins, but—" He hesitated. "Politics are at play here. The chairman is concerned about setting precedents that might create liability issues." "What can I do?" Sarah asked, rising to her feet. "Prepare your strongest case," he advised, "and perhaps have Emily ready to speak if needed. It's harder to say no to a child's face than to an abstract concept." As 900 a.m. approached, Sarah gathered her documentation, her observation notes, statements from patients who had benefited from Max's presence, medical records showing improved outcomes. She had just finished organizing her materials when Captain Reynolds appeared in the corridor. "We've got a situation developing," he said without preamble. "The hospital's legal counsel is recommending immediate removal of the dog, citing liability concerns. They've contacted animal control to be on standby." Sarah's stomach tightened. "They can't just—" "They can," Reynolds interrupted grimly, "unless we can change their minds in the next hour." Together, they hurried to the conference room where the meeting would be held. Staff members were already filing in, many wearing hastily made blue ribbons pinned to their scrubs, a show of solidarity for Max. Dr. Anderson stood near the doorway, deep in conversation with an elegant older woman Sarah didn't recognize. "That's Judith Winters," Reynolds whispered. "Patricia's mother. Interesting that she's here." Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Stuck in traffic. Emily very upset. We'll try to make it before meeting ends." Sarah took a seat near the front as Director Winters called the meeting to order. The hospital board members sat in a row beside her, their expressions professionally neutral. A man in a suit, whom Sarah recognized as the hospital's attorney, stood off to the side, legal pad in hand. "Thank you all for coming," Director Winters began, her voice crisp. "As you know, we've been dealing with an unusual situation regarding an unauthorized animal on hospital premises. While I understand many of you have formed an attachment to this dog, we must make decisions based on hospital policy, patient safety, and legal considerations." She gestured to the attorney, who stepped forward. "After reviewing the situation, it's my recommendation that the animal be removed immediately. While there have been no incidents thus far, the potential liability of allowing an untrained, uncertified animal to interact with patients presents an unacceptable risk to the institution." A murmur of disagreement rippled through the room. Doris Williams raised her hand. "With all due respect, sir, Max is not untrained. He's a fully trained military service dog who has demonstrated exceptional behavior during his time here. Military training doesn't equate to therapy dog certification," the attorney countered. "Furthermore, the dog's actual ownership is unclear, raising additional liability questions." Captain Reynolds stood. "The VFW is prepared to assume all liability and cover any additional insurance costs. We've already drafted the necessary paperwork." Director Winters interceded. "While we appreciate the offer, Captain Reynolds, there are protocols that must be followed. The board has a responsibility to ensure—" May I speak?" The interruption came from Judith Winters, who had risen from her seat at the back of the room. Despite her age, she commanded attention instantly, her posture straight, her voice clear. Director Winters appeared startled. "Mother, this is an administrative meeting. I think you should hear what I have to say. Patricia." Judith moved to the front of the room with deliberate steps. "Many of you don't know me. I served as a nurse in Vietnam at the 24th Evacuation Hospital near Da Nang. In 1969, our field hospital was attacked during the Tet Offensive. The room had gone completely silent. Even the attorney had stopped writing to listen. We had over 200 wounded men in our care and only 12 medical staff on duty when the attack began." Judith continued. "What saved many of those men wasn't sophisticated equipment or medications. It was a German shepherd named Duke, a scout dog whose handler had been killed 2 days earlier." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. "Duke alerted us to the approaching enemy forces minutes before they reached our perimeter. Those precious minutes allowed us to move patients to safer areas and prepare defenses. After the attack, that dog stayed with us for 6 months, alerting to incoming wounded, comforting the dying, standing guard during procedures when anesthesia made patients vulnerable." Judith turned to face her daughter directly. "Patricia, when your father was wounded and sent to our hospital, Duke was the first to detect the infection that nearly took his leg. The dog's behavior changed near your father's bed, and I ordered additional tests based on that alone. The surgeon later told me we caught the sepsis just in time." Director Winters' professional composure wavered visibly. "You never told me that story." "Some experiences from war are difficult to share," Judith replied softly. "But I'm telling you now, because that dog is the reason you were born, the reason your father came home whole. Sometimes wisdom means recognizing when rules need to bend for a greater good." In the profound silence that followed, the conference room door opened. Margaret entered with Emily, who looked like she'd been crying. Max, who had been lying quietly beside Sarah's chair, immediately stood at attention. "I apologize for interrupting," Margaret began. "But Emily has something she'd like to share with the board." Director Winters hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead, Emily." The 9-year-old stepped forward, clutching a folded paper in her hands. Her voice trembled slightly as she began to read. "My dad was the bravest person I knew. When he got sick, he told me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what's right even when you are scared." She unfolded the paper, a child's drawing of a man in uniform with a German shepherd at his side. "Before my dad died, he made me promise to be brave. And he made Max promise to keep helping people." Emily looked up, her eyes moving from face to face. "Max is still following my dad's orders. He's checking on patients and protecting them, just like he protected my dad in Afghanistan. He saved a man's life yesterday. Isn't that what hospitals are supposed to do too?" The simplicity and directness of her question hung in the air. "Dr." Anderson cleared his throat and addressed the board. "As chief of medicine, I must consider what best serves our patients' medical needs. Yesterday, I witnessed this dog detect a cardiac event before our monitoring equipment registered any anomalies. Mr. Collins would likely not have survived without that early intervention." He turned to the attorney. "As for liability, I would argue the greater liability would be explaining why we removed a resource that demonstrably improves patient outcomes and safety." The board chairman leaned forward. "While these testimonials are compelling, we need more than anecdotal evidence to establish a formal program. I anticipated that concern, Sarah said, stepping forward with her tablet. I've been documenting Max's behavior systematically, but there's something else you should see. She connected her tablet to the room's display screen and opened a video file. This is security footage from the past 2 months. I've compiled instances where Max demonstrated unusual awareness of patient distress. The video began playing, showing a series of clips: Max alerting outside a room minutes before alarms sounded, Max leading a nurse to a patient who had fallen in the bathroom, Max lying beside an agitated dementia patient who calmed at his presence. But the most remarkable footage is this, Sarah continued, advancing to a specific timestamp. This was recorded at precisely 2:17 a.m. on the night Staff Sergeant Miller died. The room watched in silence as the footage showed Max lying beside James Miller's bed, suddenly sitting upright and facing the window. The timestamp clearly showed 2:17 a.m. Moments later, the medical staff rushed in as monitors alarmed. According to the medical record, Sergeant Miller was pronounced dead at 2:17 a.m. Sarah explained quietly. Max knew the exact moment his handler passed away, and since then, he's been continuing his handler's routine, visiting patients, alerting to medical distress, providing comfort. Director Winters studied the footage for a long moment before turning to Emily. "Your father must have been an extraordinary man to command such loyalty." "He was," Emily nodded solemnly, "and he always said Max was an extraordinary dog." The board members conferred in hushed tones while the room waited anxiously. Finally, the chairman addressed Director Winters. "Given the unique circumstances and the compelling evidence presented, the board is willing to authorize a 6-month trial period for what we might call a canine therapy pilot program, with appropriate protocols in place. Of course." A ripple of relief passed through the room. Director Winters nodded, her professional demeanor returning, though her eyes remained softer than before. "I'll draft the necessary protocols immediately," she agreed. "Nurse Thompson will serve as program coordinator, given her evident rapport with the dog and her detailed documentation approach." The formal portion of the meeting concluded, but as people began to disperse, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Nancy burst into the room, her expression urgent. "It's Mr. Grayson in 218, she announced breathlessly. "He's having difficulty breathing. Dr. Peterson is with him now." Sarah immediately looked for Max, but the German Shepherd was already moving purposefully toward the door. The medical team followed as Max led the way to room 218, where they found Mr. Grayson struggling for breath, his oxygen levels dropping rapidly despite the supplemental oxygen. Dr. Peterson looked up as they entered. "Pulmonary embolism. I think we need to move him to ICU immediately." As the team prepared for transport, Max circled the bed once, then did something unexpected. He pawed gently at Mr. Grayson's right leg, whining softly. "Check the leg," Sarah suggested, remembering Max's training to detect blood anomalies. Dr. Peterson quickly examined the area Max had indicated, finding significant swelling and heat. "Deep vein thrombosis," he confirmed. "The clot likely originated here before traveling to his lungs. This changes our treatment approach." Within minutes, appropriate medications were administered and Mr. Grayson was stabilized for transfer. As the gurney was wheeled out, the elderly veteran reached down with a trembling hand to touch Max's head. "Good soldier," he whispered. Standing watch. The incident unfolded in full view of the hospital board members and Director Winters, providing immediate and dramatic confirmation of their decision. The attorney closed his legal pad without another word of objection. As the excitement subsided, Captain Reynolds approached Emily and Margaret. "There's something I'd like to show you both, if you have time this morning." Emily looked to her grandmother, who nodded permission. "We can stay a little longer." Reynolds led them, along with Sarah and Max, to a small storage room off the main lobby. Inside were several boxes and a large object covered with a cloth. "After yesterday's meeting," Reynolds explained, "some of us from the VFW got together and worked through the night on this." He pulled away the cloth to reveal a beautifully crafted wooden sign with brass lettering, "Veterans Memorial Hospital, Miller Therapy Dog Program. Continuing the mission of service." Beneath the text was a professionally mounted photograph of Staff Sergeant James Miller in uniform with Max at his side. Emily's eyes filled with tears as she ran her fingers over her father's image. "He would be so proud," she whispered. Max sat at attention beside the sign, as if he understood the significance of the moment. For the first time since his arrival at the hospital, his posture was not one of waiting, but of purpose, a soldier who had received new orders and was ready to fulfill them. The crowd that had gathered in the parking lot erupted in cheers when Captain Reynolds emerged with the news. As journalists pressed forward with questions, Emily knelt beside Max, wrapping her arms around his neck. "You did it, Max," she whispered into his fur. "You brought part of Daddy home." The next morning began with a sense of victory and new purpose. Sarah arrived at the hospital to find Max already making rounds with Dr. Peterson, the German shepherd, moving with dignified precision beside the physician as they checked on patients. A temporary ID badge with Max's photo had been clipped to his vest, making his new official status visible to all. Several patients had requested visits specifically with Max, and the nursing staff had created a makeshift schedule on a whiteboard at the station. "It's remarkable how quickly he's adapted to the new routine," Dr. Peterson commented as he updated a chart. "It's almost as if he's been waiting for permission to fully engage with the patients." Sarah nodded, watching as Max gently rested his head on the bed of an elderly woman who stroked his fur with arthritic fingers. "I think James trained him to help people, and now he can do that openly instead of maintaining his vigil." And the transition wasn't without challenges. However, by midday, Director Winters had delivered a 6-page protocol document outlining the rules and limitations of Max's hospital access. Certain areas remained off-limits: operating rooms, isolation units, sterile supply areas. Each staff member who worked with Max required a brief training session on handling procedures. Documentation of all interactions was mandatory. "She's micromanaging," Doris grumbled as she reviewed the protocols, "turning a beautiful thing into bureaucracy." "She's protecting the program," Sarah countered, understanding the director's position better now. "If something went wrong and we hadn't followed proper procedures, the entire program could be shut down. This way, everything is by the book." The afternoon brought Emily and Margaret back to the hospital. The transformation in the child was striking, her face animated, her posture confident as she helped introduce Max to patients he hadn't yet met. She carried a small photo album and shared stories of her father's service, connecting veterans to the larger narrative that had brought Max into their lives. "She's becoming a little ambassador," Margaret observed, watching her granddaughter with quiet pride. "James would be amazed to see her like this. She's barely spoken about him since the funeral." As visiting hours ended, Sarah noticed Emily growing quieter, her enthusiasm fading as departure time approached. The girl knelt beside Max, whispering something in his ear while Margaret collected their belongings. "Is everything okay?" Sarah asked gently, approaching as Emily stood. Emily nodded, but her expression was troubled. "I told Max I'd see him tomorrow after school," she said softly. "But it's hard to leave him here." Sarah understood the conflict immediately. The arrangement that had seemed so perfect in theory now revealed its emotional complications. Max would remain at the hospital as a therapy dog, while Emily would visit, but ultimately return home without him. The separation, necessary for the program to function, reopened the wound of loss for a child already deeply scarred by absence. "Would you like to stay a little longer today?" Sarah offered. "Max is due for his dinner break. You could feed him in the courtyard." Emily's face brightened momentarily, but Margaret shook her head. "We have a dinner appointment with Emily's teacher to discuss her returning to school tomorrow. We really should go." The disappointment in Emily's eyes was palpable as she gave Max a final hug before following her grandmother toward the exit. Max watched them go. His ears slightly drooped, before returning to his post outside room 218, now designated as the therapy dog station. Sarah couldn't shake her concern as she completed her shift. The solution they'd crafted seemed suddenly fragile, built on a compromise that might ultimately satisfy no one completely. Max had a purpose now, but at what cost to Emily, who had already lost so much? These thoughts still troubled her as she left the hospital that evening. She had just reached her car when her phone rang, Captain Reynolds calling with alarming news. "They took Max," he said without preamble. "Animal Control came about 20 minutes ago with some paperwork claiming jurisdiction. Said they needed to complete evaluation protocols before he could be certified as a therapy dog." Sarah's heart sank. "That can't be right. The board approved the program this morning." "Something's not adding up," Reynolds agreed grimly. "I'm trying to reach Director Winters now. Dr. Anderson is furious he was there when they took him and couldn't stop it. They had some kind of court order." Sarah turned back toward the hospital entrance. "I'm coming back in. We need to figure out what's happening." The scene in the hospital lobby was one of confusion and anger. Several staff members had gathered around Dr. Anderson, who was on the phone, his expression thunderous. Doris was comforting a weeping Nancy, while Roger Kim examined a copy of the paperwork the animal control officers had presented. "This authorization is dated yesterday," Roger noted, frowning. "Before the board even made their decision. Someone planned this," Dr. Anderson said as he ended his call. "Director Winters claims she knows nothing about it. The paperwork has her signature, but she swears she never signed anything authorizing Max's removal." Sarah felt a chill. Where did they take him? "County Animal Shelter," Roger supplied, "but they close at 5. No one will be there until morning." The implications settled heavily on the group. Max, who had spent months maintaining his lonely vigil, who had finally found purpose and connection again, was now locked in a kennel for the night. Alone. "We need to call Emily and Margaret," Sarah said, reaching for her phone. Dr. Anderson shook his head. "Let me make that call. You and Captain Reynolds focus on getting the paperwork straightened out. We need to be at that shelter when they open tomorrow." The news hit Emily and Margaret hard. Within 30 minutes, they arrived at the hospital. Emily's face streaked with tears, her small body trembling with distress. "They can't take him away," she cried, clutching her father's dog tags that had been removed from Max's collar and given to Dr. Anderson. "He needs to be here. Daddy told him to stay here." Margaret looked shell-shocked, her earlier reservations about Max seemingly forgotten in the face of her granddaughter's anguish. How could this happen after everything, after the board's decision? The question hung in the air as Dr. Anderson continued making calls, trying to reach anyone with authority to intervene. The hospital's attorney arrived, reviewing the paperwork with increasing concern. "This isn't right," he concluded. "The signature appears authentic, but the form itself isn't standard protocol. Something's off here." As night fell, the group reluctantly disbanded, agreeing to meet at the animal shelter at 7 a.m. when it opened. Sarah offered to drive Emily and Margaret home, but as they reached the parking lot, Emily suddenly collapsed, her breathing rapid and shallow. "She's having an asthma attack," Margaret realized with alarm, fumbling in her purse for Emily's inhaler. "She hasn't had one in months." Sarah immediately helped Emily back into the hospital, where Dr. Peterson quickly assessed her condition. "We need to get her on a nebulizer," he determined. "Her oxygen saturation is dropping." Emily was admitted for overnight observation, her small frame dwarfed by the hospital bed as machines monitored her breathing. The cruel irony wasn't lost on anyone. She was assigned to room 218, the very room where her father had died, where Max had maintained his vigil. The stress triggered it, Dr. Peterson explained quietly to Margaret in the hallway. Her medical records show her asthma has been well controlled since starting therapy after her father's death, but emotional distress can precipitate an attack. Margaret nodded, her earlier composure crumbling as she watched her granddaughter through the door window. First her father, then her mother, years before that, and now Max. That child has lost too much already. As the night deepened, news spread through the veteran community about Max's seizure by animal control. By midnight, Captain Reynolds called with an update. Veterans were gathering at the animal shelter, prepared to maintain an all-night vigil until the facility opened. Local news vans had arrived to cover the story. Meanwhile, at the county animal shelter on the outskirts of town, Max lay in a concrete kennel, surrounded by the sounds of other confined animals. For the first time since arriving at Veterans Memorial Hospital, he was separated from his post, from his purpose, from the mission his handler had given him. The German shepherd did not bark or whine like the other dogs. He sat at attention facing the kennel door, amber eyes fixed on the exit, waiting with the patience of a soldier who understood that sometimes missions encountered unexpected obstacles. Outside the shelter, rain began to fall, soaking the growing crowd of veterans who stood firm, many in uniform caps and jackets, maintaining their own vigil for one of their own. Dawn broke over Spring Creek with a gray, misty light that clung to the veterans standing vigil outside the county animal shelter. Their numbers had grown through the night, with some bringing folding chairs and thermoses of coffee, others standing stoically despite the persistent drizzle. Local news crews had set up portable canopies, cameras trained on the shelter's still-locked doors, Sarah arrived just before 6:30 a.m., having spent a restless night at the hospital checking on Emily. The girl's condition had stabilized, but the emotional distress remained evident in her troubled sleep. As Sarah approached the shelter, Captain Reynolds emerged from the crowd to meet her. "Any word from the hospital?" he asked, his voice rough from the night air. "Emily's breathing is better, but she's devastated." Sarah replied, "Margaret is staying with her." "Any movement here?" Reynolds shook his head. "We've seen staff arrive through the back entrance, but they're not opening until 7. We've got Congressman Walker on his way. He's a Vietnam veteran and has some pull with the county commissioners." As they spoke, Dr. Anderson's car pulled into the parking lot. The physician looked as though he hadn't slept. His normally immaculate appearance rumpled, dark circles under his eyes. He carried a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. "I've been up all night going through records," he announced without preamble. "I think I know what happened." He led Sarah and Reynolds to a quiet corner away from the media. The paperwork authorizing Max's removal was genuine. In one sense, it does bear Director Winter's signature. But it wasn't signed yesterday. It was signed 3 weeks ago, before Max's identity was even confirmed. Sarah frowned. "I don't understand." "Someone submitted a request for animal control to remove a stray dog from hospital premises 3 weeks ago," Dr. Anderson explained, opening his portfolio to reveal copies of internal emails. Director Winters signed the authorization as part of routine paperwork. Yesterday, someone resubmitted that paperwork as if it were a new request, bypassing normal channels. "Who would do that?" Reynolds asked, his military bearing intensifying with anger. Dr. Anderson's expression was grim. "I have my suspicions, but no proof yet. What matters now is getting Max released. I've prepared documentation proving the board's decision supersedes any prior removal authorization." At precisely 7 Huzra a.m., a staff member unlocked the shelter's front doors. The veterans formed a corridor leading to the entrance, standing at attention as Sarah, Dr. Anderson, and Captain Reynolds approached. Inside, the shelter manager, a harried-looking woman in her 50s, was clearly unprepared for the crowd gathering outside her facility. "We're here for Max, the German Shepherd brought in from Veterans Memorial Hospital yesterday," Dr. Anderson stated, presenting his hospital ID along with the documentation. "There's been a serious administrative error." The manager reviewed the paperwork with growing concern. "I'll need to verify this with county legal before releasing the animal," she hedged. "The paperwork we received was quite clear." "Perhaps you should also verify this," came a commanding voice from the doorway. Director Winters entered, accompanied by her mother, Judith, and the hospital's attorney. "I'm Patricia Winters, hospital director. My signature was misused on that removal order. The dog is an official therapy animal with board approval." The shelter manager looked increasingly uncomfortable. "I understand the situation is complicated, but protocols must be followed. The earliest our legal department can review this would be—" "Young lady," Judith Winters interrupted, her voice carrying the authority of her nursing career. "That dog is a military service animal who has saved American lives both overseas and in your community. Every minute he spends in a cage is an insult to his service and to the veterans standing outside in the rain." The shelter manager hesitated, looking from the growing crowd outside to the determined faces before her. Finally, she sighed. I'll need someone with authority to sign the release forms, assuming full responsibility. I'll sign, Director Winters said immediately, reaching for the clipboard. As the paperwork was being processed, Sarah was permitted to check on Max. She followed a staff member through swinging doors into the kennel area, where the sounds and smells of dozens of animals created a cacophony of distress. At the far end, in a large run separated from the other animals, Max sat at attention, his posture perfect despite the circumstances. When he saw Sarah, his ears pricked forward, but he didn't move from his position until she opened the gate and called his name. Then he approached with dignified restraint, pressing briefly against her leg in a subtle display of recognition. "You're going home, Max," she told him, kneeling to check him over. Despite the night in the kennel, his coat was clean, his bearing proud. Someone had clearly made an effort to provide him with better accommodations than the standard concrete runs. One of the shelter workers approached, a young man with kind eyes. "I stayed late with him," he admitted. "My brother served in Afghanistan with a dog just like him. Couldn't stand to see him stressed in the regular kennels." Sarah thanked him sincerely as she attached a leash to Max's collar. As they walked back to the reception area, Max maintained a perfect heel position, his discipline unwavering despite the ordeal. The veterans outside erupted in applause when Max emerged from the shelter. He acknowledged the reception with quiet dignity, walking beside Sarah through the corridor of saluting former service members. News cameras captured the moment, flash bulbs popping in the morning mist. "Let's get him back where he belongs," Dr. Anderson said, holding the car door open. The drive back to Veterans Memorial Hospital was conducted in thoughtful silence, each occupant processing the events of the past 24 hours. Director Winters had gone ahead to manage the media response, while Captain Reynolds coordinated with the veterans who had maintained the vigil. "We still don't know who resubmitted that paperwork," Sarah noted as they neared the hospital. "Someone deliberately tried to remove Max from the program," Dr. Anderson nodded grimly. "Director Winters is launching a full investigation. Whoever it was didn't anticipate the community response or how quickly we'd mobilize to bring him back." As they pulled into the hospital parking lot, Sarah was surprised to see Margaret waiting at the entrance, her expression anxious. "Thank God you've got him," she said as they approached. "Emily's asking for him. Her breathing is stable, but she's refusing to take her medication until she sees Max." Dr. Anderson frowned. Hospital policy wouldn't normally allow Robert. Margaret interrupted, using his first name with unusual familiarity. "That child has lost her mother to cancer, her father to the same disease, and now believes she's losing the last connection to him. Please." The physician's professional demeanor softened. "We'll need to document it as an official therapy visit. Sarah, can you handle that while I speak with Emily's doctor?" Inside the hospital, staff members greeted Max's return with evident relief. As they made their way to the pediatric wing where Emily was being treated, Sarah noticed an unfamiliar tension in Max, a subtle alertness, his focus unwavering as they approached room 218. Emily was sitting up in bed when they entered, an oxygen monitor clipped to her finger, her small face pale but determined. When she saw Max, the transformation was immediate color returning to her cheeks, eyes brightening with relief. "Max!" she cried, reaching out with both arms. The German shepherd approached the bed cautiously, mindful of the medical equipment. He rested his head gently on the mattress beside Emily's hand, allowing her to stroke his fur while maintaining a respectful distance from the tubes and monitors. "I was so scared," Emily confessed, tears welling in her eyes. "I thought they took you away forever, like Daddy." Margaret moved to her granddaughter's side, smoothing the child's hair with tender concern. "Max is back now, sweetheart, back now. The hospital has made sure he can stay." Dr. Peterson entered, reviewing Emily's charts with approval. "Your oxygen levels are already improving," he noted. "Having your friend back seems to be good medicine." As the adults discussed Emily's treatment plan, Sarah noticed something unusual in Max's behavior. While maintaining contact with Emily, his attention had shifted to the window of room 218, the same window he had focused on the night James Miller died. His ears were alert, his gaze fixed on something only he could perceive. The hospital room door opened again, and Director Winters entered, accompanied by her mother Judith and the hospital's attorney. The director approached Emily's bed with uncharacteristic gentleness. "I owe you an apology, Emily," she said, her professional demeanor softened by genuine regret. "What happened to Max should never have occurred." Emily regarded her solemnly. "Did you find out who did it?" Director Winters exchanged a glance with her attorney before responding. "Yes, we did. One of our administrative assistants, Helen Morris, resubmitted the paperwork without authorization. She believed she was acting in the hospital's best interests." "Was she fired?" Emily asked directly, displaying the straightforward nature of children confronting injustice. "She's been suspended pending a full review," Director Winters answered carefully. "But I wanted you to know that we've implemented new protocols to ensure nothing like this happens again. Max's position here is secure." Emily nodded, seemingly satisfied with this resolution. Her hand remained on Max's head, drawing comfort from his steady presence. As the conversation continued, Sarah stepped closer to Judith Winters, who was watching Max with knowing eyes. "He's focused on that window," Sarah observed quietly. "He does that sometimes." Judith nodded. "In Vietnam, our dog Duke would sometimes stare at empty spaces beside wounded men. The chaplain used to say he could see the angels waiting to escort souls home." She smiled at Sarah's surprised expression. "I'm not saying that's what's happening here, but after 50 years in medicine, I've learned there are some things science hasn't quite figured out yet." The hospital attorney cleared his throat, drawing their attention back to practical matters. "We've prepared new documentation for Max's official status," he explained, presenting a folder to Sarah. "As program coordinator, you'll have full authority over his schedule and duties. We've also established a special fund for his care, supported by donations from the VFW and community members." Inside the folder, Sarah found not only the expected legal documents, but also something unexpected, a professionally designed ID badge with Max's photo, officially designating him as Max Miller, Therapy Canine Veterans Memorial Hospital. The badge included a QR code linking to information about the program and James Miller's military service. "This is remarkable," Sarah said, genuinely moved by the thoroughness of the response. "You've thought of everything." Director Winters straightened her jacket, her professional demeanor returning. "Veterans Memorial Hospital honors its commitments, Nurse Thompson, especially to those who have served." As the group discussed the details of Max's reinstatement, Emily's breathing deepened into sleep, her hand still resting on Max's fur. The German Shepherd remained vigilant, dividing his attention between the sleeping child and the window that seemed to hold such significance for him. In that moment, watching the child and dog finding comfort in each other's presence, Sarah realized they had uncovered something far more significant than an unusual canine behavior pattern. They had witnessed the unbreakable bond between a soldier and his service dog, a connection that transcended ordinary understanding and even death itself. The mystery of Max's behavior wasn't fully solved, but something profound had been revealed. Some missions continue beyond their expected parameters, guided by loyalty deeper than training and love stronger than separation. 6 months later, Veterans Memorial Hospital celebrated the official dedication of the James Miller Therapy Dog Program with a ceremony in the hospital's main courtyard. The space had been transformed for the occasion, with rows of folding chairs facing a small podium adorned with the American flag. Behind the podium stood a bronze plaque mounted on a stone pedestal, covered with a velvet cloth awaiting the official unveiling. Spring Creek had turned out in force for the event. Veterans in dress uniform sat in a place of honor in the front rows, alongside hospital staff who had been instrumental in establishing the program. Local media circulated through the crowd, capturing the community's pride in a program that had already gained national attention. A reporter from a major network had traveled from Chicago to cover the story of the guardian dog whose loyalty had inspired a movement. Sarah Thompson, dressed in a crisp blue suit rather than her usual scrubs, surveyed the gathering with quiet satisfaction. The past 6 months had transformed both the hospital and her own career. As coordinator of the Therapy Dog Program, she now split her time between nursing duties and overseeing Max's integration into patient care. The program had expanded beyond her initial vision, with 2 additional therapy dogs now in training, though none with Max's remarkable intuition. Max himself sat at perfect attention beside the podium, his service vest freshly brushed, a new collar bearing his official hospital credentials gleaming against his fur. At 9 years old, the German Shepherd still carried himself with military bearing, though gray now peppered his muzzle. Beside him stood Emily Miller, no longer the withdrawn child of 6 months ago, but a poised 10-year-old who had recently been elected class president on a platform of establishing a therapy dog program at her school. Margaret Wallace sat in the front row, nodding to acquaintances with newfound ease. The transformation in Emily's grandmother had been nearly as remarkable as the change in her granddaughter. Once hesitant about Max's place in their lives, Margaret had become one of the program's most vocal advocates, regularly volunteering to transport Max between the hospital and their home, where he now spent 3 nights each week. Director Winters approached the podium as the clock struck 2, her professional demeanor softened by a genuine smile. The past months had revealed unexpected depths to the administrator, whose initial resistance had given way to wholehearted support after Max's dramatic return from the animal shelter. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "6 months ago, a remarkable dog taught this hospital an important lesson about healing that goes beyond medicine. Today, we gather to officially recognize what many of you already know, that sometimes the most powerful therapy comes with 4 paws and unwavering loyalty." A murmur of appreciation rippled through the crowd as Director Winters acknowledged distinguished guests, including Congressman Walker, Captain Reynolds, and representatives from several military organizations. Dr. Anderson sat beside Judith Winters, their friendship having deepened through their shared advocacy for the program. The James Miller Therapy Dog Program has already transformed patient care at Veterans Memorial. Director Winters continued. Average recovery times in participating units have decreased by nearly 12%. Patient satisfaction scores have reached their highest levels in our hospital's history, and perhaps most remarkably, our staff retention rate has improved significantly, with many citing the program as a factor in their decision to remain with us. She gestured toward Emily and Max. None of this would have been possible without the extraordinary bond between a soldier, his dog, and his daughter. Staff Sergeant James Miller's legacy lives on not just in our memories, but in the continuing mission of service he inspired. Emily stepped forward then, her small hand resting on Max's head as she addressed the gathering with composure that belied her age. My dad used to say that service isn't just what you do, but who you are, she began, her clear voice carrying across the suddenly silent courtyard. He taught Max that, and Max taught it to all of us. When my dad died, I thought I'd lost him forever, but Max knew better. He knew that my dad's mission wasn't over, and neither was his. She turned to look at Max with unmistakable pride. In Afghanistan, Max saved my dad's unit 3 times. Here at home, he saved 17 patients in 6 months by alerting medical staff to problems before machines could detect them. The doctors call it medical intuition, but I call it keeping a promise. There were few dry eyes in the audience as Emily returned to her position beside Max, who maintained his dignified bearing despite the emotion surrounding him. Director Winters invited Captain Reynolds to join her at the podium for the unveiling of the memorial plaque. Together, they removed the velvet covering to reveal the bronze plaque bearing James Miller's image in relief, alongside a perfect rendering of Max at attention. The inscription read, "The James Miller Therapy Dog Program, established 2025, continuing the mission of service. In honor of Staff Sergeant James Miller and his faithful partner Max, who taught us that healing comes in many forms and some bonds transcend all understanding." Below the main text was a smaller inscription. "I'll be home soon, buddy." The last words of SSG Miller to his service dog as the plaque was unveiled. Max's posture shifted subtly. His ears pricked forward, his gaze moving to a point just beyond the gathering. For a moment, he seemed to focus on something only he could see, his attention unwavering until Emily gently touched his shoulder, bringing him back to the present moment. The ceremony concluded with the presentation of a special commendation to Max from the governor's office, recognizing his unique contribution to veterans' health care. As people mingled afterward, sharing stories and congratulations, Sarah found herself standing beside Judith Winters at the refreshment table. "You've done remarkable work, Nurse Thompson," the elder Winters observed, watching as children from Emily's class took turns petting Max under her careful supervision. "You've created something that will outlast all of us." "It wasn't really my creation," Sarah admitted. "I just helped others see what was already there, Max's dedication to his mission." Judith smiled knowingly. "The best nurses always say that. We don't create healing, we create the conditions where healing can occur naturally." As the afternoon progressed, guests gradually departed until only a small group remained. Sarah, Emily, Margaret, Captain Reynolds, and the Winters women. They sat in comfortable silence in the courtyard, watching as Max made a final patrol of the perimeter, checking each doorway as he had been trained to do in another life, on distant battlefields. "He still checks room 218 first thing every morning," Sarah noted. "Even though we've converted it to the therapy dog station." Emily nodded. "He always will. That's where he said goodbye to Dad." "And where he found his new purpose," Margaret added, her hand resting lightly on her granddaughter's shoulder. As sunset painted the courtyard in golden light, Emily led Max to the bronze plaque. The German shepherd sat at attention before his handler's image, a soldier rendering respect to a fallen comrade. Emily knelt beside him, her arm around his sturdy frame. "Mission accomplished, Max," she whispered, though the others could hear her in the quiet evening air. "Daddy would be so proud of you, of both of us." Max turned to look at her then, his amber eyes meeting hers with an intelligence and understanding that transcended ordinary animal awareness. For the first time, he gently licked her cheek, a gesture of affection he had previously reserved only for James. The significance wasn't lost on anyone present. After months of faithful service, of maintaining his vigil, of continuing his handler's mission, Max had finally transferred his primary loyalty to Emily, not abandoning his devotion to James, but expanding his heart to embrace the next generation of the Miller family. As they walked together toward Margaret's waiting car, Max matched his pace perfectly to Emily's, their shadows merging in the fading light, a girl and her dog, carrying forward a legacy of service, healing, and unwavering loyalty that would inspire Veterans Memorial Hospital for generations to come. "Some things can't be explained by medical science," Judith Winters remarked softly as they watched the trio depart. "And some things don't need to be." Sarah could only nod in agreement, understanding now what she had glimpsed 6 months ago when a mysterious German shepherd had first captured her attention. Some bonds truly do transcend all understanding, continuing their mission long after conventional wisdom would declare it complete. In a world that often moves too fast, forgetting those who served and sacrificed, Max's story reminds us of what truly matters. How many of us remember what it means to keep a promise, to maintain a vigil when all hope seems lost? Max, a soldier in his own right, showed us that loyalty doesn't end when heartbeat does. For our generation who watched friends go to war, who know the weight of loss and the struggle to find meaning afterward, this German shepherd's unwavering devotion speaks to our deepest values. Remember how we were raised to stand by our word, to honor our commitments, to believe in something greater than ourselves. Max embodies this fading code. When he sat outside room 218, day after day, he wasn't just a dog missing his master. He was keeping a sacred promise, continuing a mission of service. In our twilight years, as we consider our own legacies, let Max's story remind us the connections we forge can outlast us. The missions we begin can continue through those we love, and sometimes the most profound healing comes from the most unexpected sources. After all, isn't that what we all hope for, that our life's purpose continues, even after we're gone?